I say so much of the success that I'm having and things that are good in my life today are because I open myself up to the opportunity to be uncomfortable practically every single day. You know, there's always something new that you can do that's scary. I mean, even being on this podcast, I'm super nervous, but I'm doing it because it's going to be helpful and it's fun and I'm meeting new friends. So it's one of those things like, don't let the fear and don't let the nervousness prevent you from doing something that could be, you know, potentially very fun for you as well as very helpful for other people.
That was Joanie Simon, and this is episode number 164 of the Chopped Podcast. Hey everyone, I'm Marley of the blog Namely Marley. As you know, I am your host, and this is the Chopped Podcast. You know, I like to think of this as a podcast for people just like you, bloggers who love food. I discovered today's guest, Joanie Simon, probably like a lot of you did, on her YouTube channel, The Bite Shot. Sean actually saved it for me and he said, you know, I thought you might like this YouTube channel, and he was so right. I just have been absorbed with it. I have been, you know, binge watching a lot of the episodes that I had to catch up on. And it's just been such a great resource. I love her, Joanie's channel, and her, you know, she's just so personable and real, and she's sharing these great tips on food photography and styling. And I mean, I know you've heard it on this show before, but food photography is one of those things that, it has a steep learning curve to get started. And then it's like the learning curve seems like it never ends because you're just constantly learning new things. And sometimes that can feel a little overwhelming, I'll be honest. Sometimes it feels like everybody has some certain thing figured out, and, you know, it takes forever to get that for yourself. And it gets annoying after a while. And just to have someone like Joanie, who seems like, you know, so patient and also very funny, and just, you know, in there sharing her tips, and also the tutorial part of it is just great. It's just, I found it to be very helpful. I love her tips. I love, she talks about everything from specular highlights to the rule of thirds, and even how, you know, to create your own food photography backdrops so that you don't have to go buy those expensive ones. So it's great. And in fact, I mentioned in today's show that, you know, that term specular highlights is something that was new to me. I always just called this stuff on the food that I want more shiny stuff. So I loved learning that term. And then she also mentioned somewhere in one of her episodes about how handy the fan brush can be. So it's a brush that's like a regular paintbrush, but at the end it fans out. And her point was that you can use that to kind of go in between when you've got your food all set up. You can kind of go in between and and just brush off, you know, crumbs if you want to get rid of those. And so I feel like a little bit like a fairy walking around with my little fan brush and shouting specular, I want more specular highlights. So anyway, it's quite a scene, and I'm sure Sean is really disappointed that I learned that word because I shouted a lot. But, you know, there's something to be said for learning the terminology, for, you know, every little thing that you learn. Just, I don't know, I think it brings more passion to the work that you're doing. And I love that. So in fact, I love this heartfelt conversation. It's fun. It's informative. And there's even a little bit about my favorite topic, authenticity. And so I think you're really going to love this conversation. So let's get straight to it. But first, I want to share with you the review of the week. This one is from Sarah of Life's Little Sweets. Sarah says, I listen to this podcast every week religiously, and it's such a great resource for food bloggers. And I find it to be a supportive podcast that covers so many helpful topics. Thank you so much, Sarah. It means a lot to hear from you. You know, podcast reviews are the bread and butter for podcasters. It really just helps the show tremendously every time you give it a like and a review. It's the kind of thing that helps us deliver more and more great content because we can help us get the kind of guests you'd love to hear. So take a few minutes and leave a review, and maybe you'll be a future featured listener. On to today's show. Let's get straight to it. Here's today's featured guest, Joanie Simon. Hey everyone, I'm happy to have Joanie Simon. She's of the site by the same name and also with the YouTube channel, The Bite Shot, and she's on the show today. Hey Joanie, welcome to the Chop Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to be talking to you because, well, I've kind of been, what do they call that when just vegging out on your videos lately?
Yes. Having a couple little YouTube binge sessions, eh?
Yes, a couple of binge sessions, and it's just like so absorbing. And I love your hair, and I love everything.
Oh
It's
my
so cool.
God, you're so sweet. It cracks me up when I get DMs from people on Instagram saying, "Oh my God, I just stayed up till 3 in the morning binging videos." I'm like, "Oh my God, dear God bless you." Like handling me for more than 20 minutes. Very few
Oh
people
no,
can
you're
do that.
adorable. I love how you go into opera. I mean, do you have a background in singing?
So I do, well,
You
it's like that past history of high school show choir that never
Yes.
really left me. I lived Glee. And so it's my way to continue that experience and that lineage today.
I absolutely love it. And I think it's just like, I love how free that you feel with just being yourself on
Yeah,
camera. I mean, I think it's a
thank
lot. I think
you.
we all struggle with that, don't you think?
Oh, it's so hard, and a lot of people ask me, and I'm actually hopefully doing a presentation at an upcoming conference, especially or specifically on that topic, because it's hard to get in front of camera and, make yourself vulnerable in front of
Yeah.
God knows who on the internet. And,
Yeah.
but at the same time, when you are doing something that you absolutely love and you've got enough experience. I mean, fortunately, I think all those years in the performing arts definitely gave me a leg up in that. And
Yes.
years in Toastmasters groups and improv groups, things like that, I think has really helped lend toward my comfort level there. But I do tell people, you just got to rip the Band-Aid off and spend a lot of time being uncomfortable on camera, because guaranteed there are lots of videos out there of me being not so comfortable on camera. So it's lots of practice.
Well, I think there's some truth to that. Like, what you're just saying, like rip the Band-Aid off or you
Yeah.
gotta find ways to be a little uncomfortable. Otherwise, I think you're maybe not stretching yourself enough. I don't know.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I mean, people, I say so much of the success that I'm having and things that are good in my life today are because I open myself up to the opportunity to be uncomfortable practically every single day. There's always
Yeah.
something new that you can do that's scary. I mean, even being on this podcast, I'm super nervous, but
Oh,
I'm doing it because it's
yes.
going to be helpful and it's fun and I'm meeting new friends. So it's one of those things, like, don't let the fear and don't let the nervousness prevent you from doing something that could be, potentially very fun for you as well as very helpful for other people.
Yeah, exactly. And don't you think sometimes the thought of the thing is worse than actually the thing itself? It's like, maybe public speaking would be an exception to that rule, but I think for the most part, my worry and thinking of the thing
Oh,
makes it, once I get up there and I start doing it, then it's better.
right? And you're like, why was I so
What is
stressed
this?
out about
Yes,
this?
it's fine. Made a big deal of
This is
nothing.
so much fun. This is great. I can totally do this. Or, oh, well, that wasn't so awesome, but guess what? I can do it again and it'll be better next time.
I love that quote where they say that fear, the palpable, like the physiology of fear is very similar to excitement, and oftentimes we
Oh,
misinterpret that.
interesting that
So
there's similarities, huh?
yes, there's a faster heartbeat. There's, all these things that are happening that you interpret as fear can also be physiologically described as excitement. So they're kind of the same thing.
So if you just harness it in the right direction, you
Yes,
can really make a positive impact.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a good. I like that. I'm gonna have to think about that next time, because I do still, for as much as I love YouTubing and kind of really feel comfortable in front of the camera by myself, and doing live TV segments and things like that here in Phoenix. You put me up in front of a live audience, and
Yes.
I like verge of panic attack on every single time. I still do it because it's something that there's like that exhilarating thing and I do enjoy it, but God, it scares the crap out of me. So I'll remember that next time, that we're just going to use this for good and not
Yes.
scaredness.
Yeah, that's the way to go about it, I think. I still sweat buckets when I have to speak, but at least
Ah,
it's easier when when I know that, I'm actually looking forward to this. Is excitement. This is like me
yeah,
being excited about doing
yeah,
this. Yeah.
exactly. It's all about the frame of reference, right?
So let's talk a little bit about your stuff, because I
Yeah.
oftentimes will say to somebody, what caused you to go into being a food blogger? And then I questioned this with you because I was kind of wondering, do you call yourself a food blogger, or are you a food photographer or a food stylist? What do you call who are you? Who are you, Joanie?
If you can answer that for me, that'd be amazing. No, because I think it just totally depends on who I'm talking to, you know?
Yeah.
I think anymore, since in terms of like what I'm doing on a daily basis is so photography related that I
Yes.
call myself a food photographer.
Yeah.
But as far as there's definitely though time and place when, I mean, and very much still what I do, like I did last night, I published a new recipe on my blog. So I'm definitely proud to also call myself a food blogger. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today had I not started many multiple food blogs over the course of the last 10 years, some that still live in infamy in some dark corner of the internet. But yeah, so it just kind of depends on what day it is and who I'm talking to.
That's good. But you did at one point think, or maybe it sounds like even at several points you thought, I'm going to start a food blog and it's going to be
Oh,
called blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to,
yes, many of it. Well, okay, let's see. I think I've had 3 different food blogs over the years. My very first one, which people go, what, was when I lived in New York. I had this like week-long experiment in veganism because, you know,
yeah.
the things you do in your 20s. It made sense. So I was getting into it, and this was like circa 2000. What year would this have been? Around 2008. So blogs were just kind of starting to be a thing, especially in the vegan community. And so it was a way for me to connect with other vegans and also share, because I was living in New York at the time, and my family's all in Arizona. So it's a way for me just to, you know, share what's going on in my life and the food that I'm eating, and taking terrible pictures of food. But, you know, there wasn't as much, like, I mean, photography for food wasn't as much of a thing in the blogosphere at that point in time. So that blog still lives today, but I never, of course, thought that could be some sort of professional thing. That was just a side gig. But where suddenly things started to click was when I moved back to Arizona and I started working in the family business selling point of sale systems to restaurants. So it's computer systems for restaurants.
Yes.
And technology stuff. And I started to get to know a lot of chefs, and I was no longer vegan. The vegan experiment for 2 years kind of in the food blog with it sort of died. But I thought, you know, these chefs and these restaurant people are so interesting, and I'd love to share these stories. So I actually started a podcast and had about 250 podcast episodes, and, you know, had a blog that went along with it, doing local restaurant reviews and sharing some chef recipes and other things like that. But at a certain point then in that journey, and just kind of some personal things that I was working through in my life, I realized, you know what, I love to cook, and I want to share what I'm cooking, not what other people are cooking. And so then too, seeing what was happening in the world of the blogs, you know, the Pinch of Yums and the Sally's Baking Addiction, and seeing what was happening, and like people are making like some legit dough on this, and I'm not happy doing what I'm doing. And went through a lot of soul searching, a lot of personal growth and development, and ultimately ended up leaving my job to pursue food blogging full time without any sort of following or platform. So it was definitely not I waited to launch a full time food blog business until I had the income, if that makes sense. You know, I think a lot of people sort of wait till they've replaced that income. I'm like, no, we're just going to rip the Band-Aid off, go full head into this. And I don't know. I had this reassurance of faith that that's where I was supposed to be. I didn't quite know how it was going to work out. But that's when I launched JoanieSimon.com, which still exists today. And some of those recipes, that was in 2015. And so some of those recipes still, of course, live there today and get added to. But through that was then how the photography really came to the forefront. And that's been my love and what I've really enjoyed out of the entire food blogging experience personally.
I don't know if you know this, but Julia Cameron has that book, The Artist's Way. Are you familiar with that book?
No, but I need to write that down right now, I think.
Oh, it's such a good book. And what she does is talks about how oftentimes we think that art is something that can't be managed, that it has to be this kind of fluttery feeling, and we can only, do our art when that feeling takes over. And she talks about ways that you can manage it. And she also talks about shadow careers. And so it sounds to me like what you were doing with your podcast, interviewing chefs and the point of sales with restaurants sounds a little bit like, a shadow career where there's something that you're interested in, but you just either don't know it or somehow you've landed in this spot that has led you to where you are today.
Oh my gosh. So many things, because people
Yes.
say, did you set out to start this, popular YouTube channel and become a food photographer? And I go, heck no. Like, how would I have planned any of that? But, I look back over all of the choices and the decisions in my past that seemingly at the time had no connection to one another, right? Like I studied
Right.
art history in undergrad and I got a higher education administration degree and worked with college students through my master's degree. And then I spent all these years in sales and working with restaurants and chefs. And so it's this thing where I look and go back and I go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that when I was working in sales, I thought it was so random. But now, as a small business owner and somebody who handles her own books and understands, how you got to make
Yes.
money and spend money and how all that kind of works, all that business sense, I got in real life training and all of those principles of art history, of composition and color and theory and all those sort of things 100% apply in my photography today. And so it's just one of those things where at the time it made no sense, but now looking back in retrospect, it was the absolute perfect combination that I'm using all those skills today.
Oh, that's so cool. So you did not have a background in photography. You decided to kind of figure it out on your own.
Yep. I am self-taught, YouTube, duking it out with the camera late at night, wanting to throw that thing out the window, tears,
So many
thousands
times.
of photos. I mean, we've all been there, right?
Yes.
You're like, did I really need to take 500 photos of that plate of spaghetti? But,
Seriously.
so all the mistakes I've made, I've bought so much stuff over the years in hopes and attempts that it would, solve all my problems. Unfortunately, through the course of just time and diligence, and also really loving it though too. I think that photography, there's that creative element to it, just like cooking and just like food blogging, any sort of creative pursuit, that there's that little element. And for me, the visual medium, just that so speaks to my heart and to, what drives me and motivates me. And certainly, again, goes back to that college kid who's like, I want to get an art degree, but I can't get a job in art. And I'm like, man, if only I'd taken photography classes, that would have been amazing. But lo and behold, here we are today.
And there's YouTube, so you're able to, solve that problem.
Yeah, well, and that's why I am so excited about the Bite Shot, my YouTube channel, and getting to share what I know about photography and what I've learned the hard way, and seeing other people now who are in the spot where I was, 3, 5, however many years ago, going, oh my gosh, right? Because like if I can shorten that learning curve for somebody, that just feels so good to me because I know what that feels like. It is so frustrating to be like, I just don't know why this is not working. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, because you don't know what you don't know sometimes.
Right.
And so just to like open up these funny little like aha moments that, there's a couple moments throughout the course of the various videos I have on my YouTube channel, but there's a couple of them that have some little things that just resonate with so many people. That's just this one little stupid feature or function or thing to know about photography that suddenly goes, oh my gosh. And I live for that, because I know, we all know that feels so good to have those breakthroughs and to have somebody be able to just share that with you.
Well, and like earlier you were talking about your background in performance, and I think that, we've all heard this, you just have to fake it to make it, or you got to play the part. And I think sometimes knowing the lingo really helps. And so the example I have is you talk about specular highlights in one of your videos. And I freaking love that term. I've been walking around. My husband's probably like, why did you watch that video? Because now it's all like, because I've been constantly saying, I like the shiny stuff. I want more shiny stuff. And now
you can be killer with some legit lingo, girlfriend.
Legit. I also have my little fan brush, and so I'm walking around with my fan brush saying specular highlights. I feel like a genie, or no, like
you are all in. But it does feel very empowering. But at the same time, like, also knowing that to take some of the mystery out of it, because I think that photography, at least was a lot of my experience early on, was that it's like so shrouded in perfection and gear and technique and all these things. And I'm like, no, this is a creative pursuit. Like, I want to approach photography like a cook more than a baker, because that's how I am in life. Not that I'm saying baking is a bad thing, but that's just like how my brain personally functions. I want to throw in a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I don't want to have to necessarily measure and calculate. Now, I'm not saying throw your camera settings out the window. There's certainly value in understanding the technical components, but not making that the be all end all. And that that knowing all the terms is going to suddenly make you an amazing photographer. So, but it is when you can like be legit on the street, that's when it feels good too.
Well, I actually have 2 points based on what you just said, because it's interesting. I started doing the photo shoots with my husband because he does have a background in photography. In fact, that's all he wanted to be when he was 12. So he loves the technical side of the camera. And I have learned since working with him, understanding what the camera can do is really helpful. Like he knows he can just zoom right in there and figure out whether the shot was in focus, or he really has a process down that I really admire. So I can see where the technical side of the camera can be very helpful. But the other thing, I'm just cracking up here because you're talking about being a cook versus a baker. And I actually was thinking about that. I was thinking, because I watched your video on making your own food photography boards.
Yes.
And to me, I decided that making your own food photography boards is a little bit like making homemade pastries. Yeah. Like I see a recipe and all I want to do is change it. But if you're making like pastries, you need to like freaking weigh the flour. Right? I mean, you
follow
really
the rules.
Follow that recipe. And that's how I kind of feel like with food photography boards, because I was just like, okay, so here's what I was doing, Joanie. Oh, well, she thinks that, I mean, I'm just going to be spraying this thing with a matte spray anyway, so I could use a glossy paint color underneath it. Let me just tell you, it did not work.
No.
No.
But it's okay.
Joanie waves a finger. No.
It's okay. You can throw a little chocolate in the babka. It's not going to hurt anybody.
Right.
It's fine.
Right, it'll be okay. No, it won't.
Yeah, well, exactly. There's time and place, but I get you. I appreciate your creativity though.
Yeah, thank you. I just think on the food photography boards, I think unless you have a background in art, you really need to follow a kind of, get the exact same paints that you're talking about and experiment with it a few times like that. And then I should say that differently, follow it exactly and then experiment.
Yeah. Well, because I think that's so true. And I think that's so true also in photography because, so many times I feel like a lot of the folks that I talk to, and I know this has been me too in the past, is like you feel like you're just kind of wandering around and you're trying to get it and you're trying to figure it out. And like you accidentally get a great shot, but you don't really know why you got a great shot. Yes. And that so much of where I think so much of the fun of it has really come from me, where I can run wild and go crazy, is because I know the rules now. I know the foundation. So now I can break them, and I can break them in ways that I know are not going to be its undoing, that it's only going to make it better and more interesting. And so you do really, when anybody's like, well, do I have to learn how to shoot my camera in manual? I'm like, well, you don't have to do anything, but I can tell you personally that my own photography, that was probably the greatest leap in terms of the quality of my images. And it is so frustrating and it was so unnerving and I didn't want to do it and it was kicking and screaming. But once I saw myself through that, and once I forced myself through that uncomfortable stage, like the payoff was huge. And so I think that's so key in photography, is really putting yourself in those positions where you're going to grow and you have to learn the hard stuff. So then you can have fun and then you can throw whatever, like, Christina Tosi with all her baking. I'm sure she riffs and gets creative and crazy all the time, but she knows the rules, and those have become intuitive to her as well.
Well, and I love how you share some of the creativity that you've done. So going back to Specular Highlights, you have the video where I think you're shooting a cupcake or something, but you basically just turn the freaking cupcake. I'm just so mad at myself because, when I don't get the Specular Highlights, what I'm doing is like moving the gear and moving all these, all these things. And I never thought about just twisting the cupcake.
No, Gosh. Totally. I had somebody in the studio with me this morning. I was doing a little one-on-one session, and she was, we were staging a scene, we were taking this photograph, and we needed the light closer to the table, and it was kind of tricky because where the tripod was, you get a lot of gear going on, and it gets a little crazy. And so she's trying to move this and trying to move this. I was like, if you just move the background on the table a little closer to the light, we're good. She's like, oh my God, right? Like you're just not thinking sometimes about the simplest little change that can suddenly completely change the whole scene.
I love it. And I also love the, you talk about the fan brush. It's such a simple thing. I think I went to Michael's and got one for $3. It's such a simple thing,
Nice.
but it does, it's able to kind of go in between. You got your scene set, and then you see all these crumbs everywhere. And, maybe you like crumbs, but some, like if you're working for certain clients, they don't always want that. So you have to
Mhm.
be picky about those kinds of things. And it's kind of
Yeah,
cool.
it's a good way to whisk away all those little extra peripheral crumbs that you don't need and not
Yes.
disrupt the rest of your scene.
I know, it's perfect. So what
Yeah.
made you say, "Hey, I'm gonna start the bite shop"? I mean, did you do that like right away after you started your blog, or did it take a little bit of time?
No, so I started the Bite Shot, the YouTube channel. It was actually a year ago this last weekend. So
Wow,
it's
happy
pretty,
anniversary.
thank you. It's pretty new. And how it all started was local bloggers, of course, there's local blogger communities. And so connecting with local bloggers, food bloggers here in Phoenix, and a lot of them were asking, well, how do you take your photographs? How do you shoot your food? Can you teach me? And so holding some small workshops, but to me, I was like, what would be easier if I could just teach all these people how to shoot in manual with a video series, right? Because I actually have another YouTube channel that I've had for about 3 years. It was all recipes based YouTube channel, never really gained any traction, didn't really ever go anywhere, but there's lots of recipes there and I learned a lot. But I was like, I'm just going to share with these people how to shoot their camera in manual, do like a 5-part series, put it on YouTube so that then if I teach workshops in the future, I can send that to them beforehand so they know how to
Yes.
shoot in manual. And then I can really have fun with you because then I can teach you things like styling and composition and not have to worry about kind of what to me is a very basic necessity if you're going to really take your photography to the next level. So I was like, I'm just going to put that out there on the internet so that it's there and I can teach people. And then I thought, I started seeing like these videos were out there and there were people asking questions and people engaging in a way that was very different than my other YouTube channel, which was, people would comment, oh, this looks like a good recipe or, whatever. But there wasn't a lot of like intentional question asking or engagement. And so all of a sudden these videos, they weren't necessarily getting tons of views, but the engagement was really interesting. And people saying, well, how do you do this? And how do you do this? And, started an Instagram and people are interacting, starting to ask questions. I was like, oh, well, let's make that a video. So here's how I shoot in natural light. And here's how I do overhead shots. And here, that it was
Yes.
really user driven content was ultimately what it ended up being. And then it was probably about 3 or 4 months in, I was looking at some of the analytics. There was sort of like a combination of videos, like how to get sharp images, because that's of course a big struggle for a lot of people. And then dark food photography. And then there was the 17 tools for food styling. There was like these 3 videos all in a row, all based on user generated questions. And so did those 3 videos. And suddenly there was this massive swell on the channel. And I was like, I have something here that is not like any of because the food blog, though it's done fine, has not necessarily seen monumental financial success or massive engagement, or, certainly not a standout in that regard. So just to see this kind of engagement and enthusiasm with this channel, I'm like, I've got something here. And so I really started to shift my focus full time to that, and even to the point of, turning away photography clients and whatnot. So it's been a crazy ride. Wasn't intentional, wasn't planned, but certainly has been a lot of fun and has been amazing just to get to connect with other food photographers because, as a solopreneur, as a creative person, you start to, sit around in your yoga pants wondering if you're the only one doing this and are there other weirdos like me? So it's been so good to meet all the other weirdos just like me and to get to help them out.
Well, and it sounds like it's a testament to what you said early on when you quit your job and you didn't really, you quit it with a leap of faith, really.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it sounds like this is kind of like that leap of faith that you were talking about. I know I'm going to figure this out. And this came along and you figured it out.
Yeah. Cause it was definitely, when I quit my job in 2015, and it was crazy. We refinanced the house and everything, it wasn't like there was some sort of cushy situation where mom and dad were footing the bill, I kind of look back and I go, how did I even I am such an A-type personality. I'm such a planner. I don't know. It was crazy, but I'm so glad I did it. But yeah, where it really started to gain steam was in the photography because I started to pick up photography clients. And so as much as I was loving blogging, I was taking a lot more photos for food brands. And that's where then the photography really came to the forefront.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, so let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit about the rule of thirds because I love
Mhm.
how you talk about that, and I think it's probably an area that I personally struggle with a lot. Is just understanding how that works in a photo and why we need to pay attention to it.
So the rule of thirds, I hate rules. To me, it's
Me too.
nothing's, and there are no rules, right? I think the rule of thirds can be definitely helpful. And I think that the various like the triangles and the various overlays, S curves, things like that can definitely help give you sort of training wheels to get started with your photos. But to me, more and more, I feel like a solid composition is made up of much more than just placing things in the right spot, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
I think that you start to look at images of food that you absolutely adore, and the ones that jump out at you, that are interesting, that stop you in the Instagram scroll, that you go, oh, wow. And is
Yes.
it because they followed the rule of thirds, or is it some other compositional technique that was stronger? And I would venture to say, probably, if we sat and really dissected images, that it's less about the rule of thirds and much more so about how are they creating opportunities for contrast in that image, right? Like that we've
Mm,
got
yes.
some bright white cupcakes against a dark, moody backdrop, or that
Yeah.
we've got, some really deep shadows that really accentuate that bowl, or we've got a really great use of a blue background with bright orange macaroni and cheese, that
Right.
there's other tools in place that I think can make for a stronger composition. That's not to say, though, that, putting something slightly off center or following,
Yeah.
that kind of curve definitely can help strengthen it. But to me, I lead much more so with thinking about, from a styling perspective, from a composition perspective, how do I create opportunities for contrast and juxtaposition, and that I can put something hard with something soft, right? That we've got this soft and creamy frosting. And so, how can I throw some hard sprinkles on that? So it's
Yes.
just like eating. It's the same sort of thing. Like, you don't just want soft on soft on soft, right? We want to throw something in there that's sort of like a little
Crunch. Makes
surprise, a
me
little
crunch on my
crunch.
ice
Exactly.
cream.
Our photos need crunch too. So same sort of idea there
I
is to
like
me what
that.
I like to teach and when I talk to folks, because I think composition, I mean, food photography in general, people, I get portrait photographers who I talk to who go, taking pictures of people, though people move and can be hard to photograph, it's like a whole other ballgame trying to take pictures of food, because not
True.
only is it understanding the photography technique, but it's understanding styling, it's understanding
Uh-huh.
color, it's understanding composition, it's dealing with food that's not going to look pristine in 2 seconds. It's
Yes.
all these various elements, and a food photograph in so many ways is like a million little things going right all at the same exact moment. Or if
Yes.
you're doing composites, in multiple moments. But
It can be kind of stressful, to be honest.
yeah, oh, very, very stressful. So,
I
that's
sweat.
why when I talk to people, and I think where a great opportunity for a lot of the folks who I coach, so much of what I help them just understand is how to appropriately plan for a shoot, that
Mm.
I never anymore just, other than if I'm just playing around with some lights and maybe like some fruit or something like that, and
Hmm.
it's just for practice and having fun. But outside of that, if this is a shoot for my blog or for a client, anything that there's a lot of planning that goes into that, so that I'm not making those decisions on the fly and second guessing myself in the moment, that I feel much more confident and can make the decisions quickly, so that when something does go wrong, I know the foundation's set.
Yes, I love. So in other words, like if you're, like you're saying, shooting some cupcake that has a
Mhm.
red cherry on top, you're already probably thinking ahead of time, like, okay, what am I going to do? What kind of mood is this? And you're kind of figuring out ahead of time what props you want or whatever, everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I did a shoot for, I work with Coaches Oats. I do the photography for their website. And so
Uh-huh.
we were working on fall themed stuff. And so we had this waffle recipe and, talk through with them. Okay, well, what's the vibe? What's the energy? Unfortunately, they're a client that I've got a great relationship with them. They really like my aesthetic. I get them, they get me. It's like this really great
Nice.
relationship. And they kind of let me run free. But they did say, we want a warmer wood backdrop and we want this to feel cozy and homey. I mean, nothing crazy. It's fall,
Right.
so it makes sense. And then we want pumpkins, which of course I'm like, okay, pumpkins in August. Let's figure this out. So, we
Oh, we
get
gotta find them.
creative. And I did
Yeah.
find some squash that look like pumpkins on the top. So I just kind of framed them around the edge so you can't see that there's
Perfect.
actually squash on the edge. But it's definitely, it was a lot of like the night before the shoot, then it's pulling props from my collection and saying, okay, I'm going to use this plate and, maybe have this plate as backup in case I don't like the color of that one. And let's even, play around with the placement of the props and, stage what's the angle I'm going to shoot from, what's the napkins I'm going to use, having my cinnamon and having my star anise and having that all kind of right there.
Yes.
So then all I had to do was cook the waffles, then put the waffles in the scene and had a really good sense of how I was going to layer everything up. And, then once it's all there, that's pretty quick start to finish. But there was a lot of time invested in the preparation so that it would go smoothly once it was time to shoot.
Well, that's the other thing about food photography is there's so many different, formats or looks that you can go for. Like, I interviewed Allie Ebright. She's actually, well, she
Oh
was here
yeah.
from Kansas City, but I think she's moved to Spain in
Yeah.
the meantime. And she loves
Yeah.
that white on white with the food, mostly focusing on the styling of the food.
Yeah.
And I love that style. In fact, I, definitely we moved more towards that because I thought I loved her thought was I don't want to think about napkins and blood, all the things. And I thought, okay, I think I could handle that. I'm going to use that as a guide. But of course, we just we're working on a cookbook now, and they want the homey so now it's like it feels like
Yeah.
I think I'm really thinking about food photography a lot right now because we are kind of pushing ourselves
You're in
in a
it.
different style. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so tricky for sure. And I face that for sure, because one client, wants the simple and clean and food forward and that's all
Yes.
it is. And then others, but that also then requires the discipline of really having a strong sense of composition within the plate itself. How do you arrange a chicken and scallop potatoes to look its
Yes.
absolute best? That's tricky. It's hard.
It
And so,
can be.
so equally as difficult to compose within that as it is, so it's just, but if you're going to be catering to a variety of different clients and different visual aesthetics, it's good to have exercise and disciplines in both so that you can flex.
Yes, I love it. I was going to actually ask you that. Like, would
Mhm.
you, I mean, I'm never wanting people to go into exact numbers or anything, but would
Yeah.
you consider, like, for example, there are a lot of bloggers that look at their main source of revenue as ad
Mhm.
traffic. And so therefore they're very traffic focused. And there's pros
Mhm.
and cons to that, the pressure of trying to get the traffic and all that stuff.
Mhm.
I'm just curious, what would you consider your main source of revenue as in the work that you're doing? Is it client work?
It's yeah. So photography for clients, exactly.
So I'm just curious, is knowing that every source of revenue has its pros and cons,
Yeah.
what in your mind would be the pros and cons to a client focused source of revenue?
That's a good question. I think that definitely one of the cons with it is that you're not necessarily creating to your own tastes.
Right.
So having to be able to be flexible. It's also tricky from that regard. I find one of the most challenging parts of working with clients is really getting inside their own creative head because, when you're creating your own stuff, which I do plenty of as well because I love it.
Yes.
But it's easy to understand my vision, but how do I understand the vision of a client? I was shooting for a restaurant last year and we were, talking about the mood board and putting everything together and preparing for the shoot. And I was working with a food stylist on that particular shoot. And so she was planning, certain props and things. And, the client says, okay, I really want it modern and edgy and hip. And so when I think modern and edgy and hip in food photography, my brain goes to Bon Appetit, right? We've got kind of these like modern and harder lines and kind of messier styling, a little gritty and, harder shadows, things like that. And so I pulled some sample images, emailed them out to the group in a mood board format. It's what we call that. And so sent that out to the group and they're like, oh yeah, no, that's not what we had in mind. I said, okay, no worries. That's cool. Can you send me some sample images of kind of what you had in mind by, modern, hip, and edgy? And they sent me a bunch of pictures from Williams Sonoma, which I love Williams Sonoma, but no planet anywhere would I classify Williams Sonoma as edgy. You know what I mean? Like to me, that's classic. That's soft. It's homey. It's clean. So it's like, but so there's neither right or wrong. It's just the fact of the matter of trying to get in somebody else's head. And so it takes a certain amount of discipline and just knowing how to extract that kind of information from people of what they're really thinking, because what one person's classification is not another's. But
what I'm wondering is how many times that you probably learned to do this mood board and to get this lingo figured out ahead of time, because there may be times where you've actually gone through the shoot and done it, and then they're like, oh, that's not what we wanted.
Oh, absolutely. And that still happens. That absolutely still happens, but the other challenging part though is if you're working with clients who they don't know what they want. And so you can create beautiful images that maybe they like, but aren't what they had in their mind. But the problem is they don't have what's in their mind. So in those kind of situations, those are the kind of clients where I let them go find another photographer. Cause I just, at a certain point, you're like, this is not helping me. This is not helping you. So, we'll part ways, but, fortunately those at this point in time are few and far between, but it definitely happens. And so those are great learning opportunities for sure. But I think one of the pros of the revenue model that I have is, people are always asking me like, are there enough food photography clients out there for somebody to make a full-time living at this? I say, absolutely. I mean, I clearly do. There are other people who are doing it as well. And I'm turning away work all the time. I would love some referral sources to go to because they're just there's so much available out there, especially as the world of online media is continuing to expand. And the kind of, that I'm doing work for clients that purely just need like Pinterest images, or they just purely need Instagram stories images. I mean, kind of images that didn't need to be created 5-10 years ago, that there's a lot more wealth in the space just in terms of the work that can be had. And so I think that you do have to be a hustler and you got to be out there, you got to be marketing yourself, and you've got to be adept at being able to, knock on doors and be a salesperson for yourself, but I think you have to do that as a food blogger as well. If you're courting sponsorship opportunities, it's a very similar sort of model in that regard. And so there is that. But
did you?
What's that?
In your early days, were you out there, but like you say, being your own salesperson?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, where I've had the most success is honestly creating content, putting it out on Instagram, putting it out on Facebook, tagging the brand, and then, suddenly it's the right person, the right time. I've gotten lucky, but it's also getting lucky is showing up at the right place at the right time.
I agree.
So like one of my first big photography gigs was shooting for Tyson Foods. It was the most bizarre situation. This was maybe like the 6th recipe on my blog when I launched JoanieSimon.com, and I took these photos of this parfait with Sara Lee pound cake. And at first part of me was like, this is not even a recipe. Like this is just pudding and whipped cream with pound cake in a glass and some confetti. Like what is this? But I was like, you know what? No, it's fine. I'm just going to put it out there. Done is better than perfect, whatever. So I published it. I posted the images on Facebook, and then I direct messaged Sara Lee pound cake through Facebook. And I just said, hey, I just posted this recipe. Really love your pound cake, yada, yada, yada. And then they wrote back, thanks so much. And then that was it. But then 6 or 8 weeks later, I can't recall the exact timeline, they reached back out and they said, hey, we'd like to refer you to our PR team over here, that the same PR who handles Sara Lee Pound Cake also handles Tyson Foods and their corn dogs through their State Fair corn dog division. I was like, okay, they need some photography. And clearly you're a photographer. I'm like, yeah, clearly I'm a photographer. No, I'm not a photographer, but okay, if you say so. And so that's that dreaded moment when they're like, what are your rates? I'm like, what do I do?
I don't know.
I have no idea.
What do you think my rate should be?
I know. What would you pay? And then maybe, what was it? A couple weeks later, there were 2 giant boxes on my patio with corn dogs, and I did my first shoots for Tyson. So it was the right place, right time, bizarre circumstance. But it's one of those moments when I always remind myself, if I'm going to publish something and I go, oh, maybe I shouldn't publish this. Maybe this is not good enough. Maybe this is, you talk yourself out of putting certain things out there. Yes. You never know, right? Like, what's the worst that could happen? I put this recipe out here and some chefy person judges me and says, that's not a real recipe. Okay. Yes. Like, is that the worst thing that could happen? Really? Then wouldn't you rather just risk it and see that you end up with this really amazing client, which is then a launching pad to a new career? Like, it's one of those crazy things that something stupid as a little parfait is really, much to credit with a lot of the success that I've had in the business I've built. So that's a lot of times the approach that I've taken, just in terms of interacting with clients and seeing, okay, hey, here's an opportunity. Because as a blogger, you do get pitched by brands, hey, feature such and such or whatever. Sometimes I'll take those freebies because I'm shooting them, photos anyway for social media, tag them and they're happy. And then maybe they come down the road and they need photography services and I'm there. But it's a fine line of not working for free as well. So you gotta strike that balance.
Yes. There are some bloggers who are just like, never work for free. Don't ever do that. But then I can see where it's kind of a door opener and there's some.
I think you gotta know. I think you can, I'm very much a person who operates out of my gut. Like, I can smell it when I get pitched by a brand who's like, we want to send you this and you're going to post these pictures for us. And I go, no, you're not going to tell me how to do this. Like, if you're going to send me the product though and say, hey, I hope you enjoy this, then maybe I'll take some pictures and, that'll be great. Right. But anybody who's kind of leading with an expectation that I'm going to return a favor for them sending me pasta, like, give me a break.
Give me a break. Yes. Look, we're gonna ask you to do these 10 things, and in exchange, we'll send you.
No, thank you. No, thank you. Because those are not going to be great long-term relationships either. Right. I would rather work with the kind of clients who are people that are generous themselves, and that when you're doing something nice for them, then they're going to do something nice in return. And that for me has worked nearly every single time.
I love that too. And so, like, when you get that email, and plus it's just so refreshing to get an email where somebody isn't asking for anything, where they're just like, we would like to just send you this gift box full of our product, and they're not asking for anything. Oh my God, that's so nice.
Those are the kind of people you want to work with, right?
Yeah, right. I wish that more brands could get that message. It would be nice.
For sure. Yeah. But and I've also, looked for folks just through, there's Expo West and Expo East, which, some folks might be familiar with. Those are trade shows specifically for food brands. So, you try to interacted with those groups. Yeah. And Fancy Food Show, that's been another great sort of launch pad. But definitely, anybody who's been in this space for a while knows that, once you've made some relationships with certain brands, that in terms of the PR agencies, that it's kind of a small niche. And so one PR agency may represent, a number of different brands. And so if you're doing photography for one of their brands and doing great work, then chances are they'll want you to do it for another.
And when they're doing photography, they're wanting you to do photography? Are they sending you the recipe so you don't have to do the recipe, right?
So it depends. It totally depends. For the most part, I do prefer for them to send me a recipe. I do recipe development. It's not my favorite thing in the world, and I honestly don't do it much anymore, other than just for myself. But I don't know. I just never felt like the pay was enough for what it was. I'm
Yeah,
sure
there's a
there's
lot of
folks
work.
getting paid, but yeah, it's just a lot of work. Like, I'd
Yes.
rather just take pictures. And for the most part, lots of the brands out there that I work with do already have their own recipes. They just need images to go with it for whether that's social media or in-store flyers or their website. Or there's a number of brands that, they don't even worry so much about the recipes. They're like, just make any sort of waffle using our flour. We don't care what the recipe is. We just need literally just the visual. So,
Yes.
so those are options as well.
I'm just curious. Okay, are there some foods that you find harder to style than others? Like, for
Yes.
example, we could talk about a burger I mean, burgers from the side are really, but obviously you can't, it's hard to, if they want to top
Yeah.
down and then burger, that's kind of hard. I'm just curious, do you have some foods that you think are harder to style?
Absolutely. Anything triangular. I will drive, like quesadillas are my arch nemesis. I hate
Really?
quesadillas. I love to eat quesadillas. I
Yeah.
hate to photograph them. They're hard. Anybody who hasn't done quesadillas, go try quesadillas. It will be a test in patience because it's just like working the angles. It's a flat thing, but there's nothing fun on top of it. Like pizza's fun, right? We could do
Yeah.
some overhead shots. We can get some 3/4 angle. It'll be great. Quesadillas, no. So you got to rely on some of those peripheral condiments to keep it exciting.
Yeah.
You got to think about, okay, well, maybe I'm going to prop this interesting because you can't just rely on a quesadilla. Like, you can make a beautiful salad and you really don't need to prop it out much, but a quesadilla, you got to prop that puppy out.
Prop that puppy out. I love it.
Yeah. They make me crazy. So,
Oh, yeah. And then I think working with, things that are melty, chocolate chips, cheese, I think
yes.
that's always to me a struggle. Like to get well, like you say, you got a few seconds where things are perfect and
Yeah.
it's tricky.
Yeah, I was doing some cornbread last night and I wanted that butter pat to be
Yes.
like, I wanted a pat of butter, but I wanted it like the perfect little
Yes.
melty around the edges, which you do, you just shoot
Yep.
it with the brulee torch.
Yes.
But you got 1 second, right? Like
Uh-huh.
you brulee it, you take the shot. And so that's when you make sure everything else is good. And if it's not, then guess what? You're shooting it again. So hopefully you've got more butter pats and cornbread. So
Maybe.
exactly. But yeah, no, I think I went through several pieces of corn. I know I went through several pieces of cornbread to get just the right, like, timing and the melt and everything else in the scene all going right together. Because even it was one of those things, it wasn't even like the focal point of the image. It was like one of these little peripheral pieces. But to me,
It makes
that's
all the
what
difference.
makes a great image is, when, of course, your hero looks amazing, but then you've got some little surprise or some little thing that, it doesn't necessarily have to be like highly propped and like tons of things in the scene, but just some sort of little surprise or something that makes it unique, because there's a lot of, there's certain food images that we've just seen everybody do the same exact version of that
Yes.
same exact image. And it's like, let's mix it up. Let's keep it exciting and take that little extra step to make it fabulous.
See, I love this conversation because I feel like before we hit record, we were talking about the importance of not getting too bogged down with perfectionism. And yet
Right.
this starts to feel a little bit like I want that photo to be perfect. So I think that you said the word excitement, and I think that's what I think if you're letting it be your passion, it doesn't come across as perfectionism. Is that right, you think?
I think that's so true. Yeah. Like, it's that, I think you hit on that, right? That it's, what's the motivation behind it, right?
Yes.
Is this driven by joy and driven by a love of it and an enjoyment, or is this driven by fear, or is this
Right.
driven by judgment or some sort of negative place? I think that's a really good point for sure.
Yeah. So just try to stay focused on the passion of I want to have this gorgeous photo, not like, oh, it's got to be better than so and so. So it really should be about the passion of it.
Yeah, well, and even that image, if I look at it, because I can't look at any of my images and say any of them are perfect, because I will pick out something, right? Like this image, and I love it, and I think it's a great image, but I really wanted just to move the plate just a little bit, and I know I could do it in Photoshop, and there's all these things, but I was like, if I could have just gotten it just a little bit more, nobody would notice. Nobody would be paying attention to it. But to me, it was like, oh, this fun little thing. But it almost at a certain point, like you kind of obsess about it and then it prevents you from moving forward. And that's the problem. So don't ever let it prevent you from doing what you got to do.
Actually feel very inspired by hearing your talk, Joanie, because that's what you talk about working from your gut and, like just quitting your job and knowing that this is the route that you were going to take. And you talk about the importance of, having faith in yourself. I think those are, it's kind of like photography. When I'm thinking about it, as I'm saying these words, I'm thinking this sounds a little bit like, there's this kind of, the planning side of us wants to take over and the science of the photography, there's like all of that, but then there's the artistry of life that we have to be in touch with too.
Yeah. And it's all not that I want people to go out and be reckless.
Yeah.
I certainly don't. But I think that, if you can sit there and say, what's the worst that's going to happen, right? Like what's the worst that's going to happen if I publish this? Somebody's going to judge me. What's the worst that's going to happen if I quit my job and I don't have any income? Okay. I mean, my worst case scenario was we lose our house and I move in with my in-laws. Would not be preferable. But would I survive? Sure.
Oh, yes. I love that. It's so interesting that you're saying this because I actually have something that I have been wanting to push the publish button on, and it's such a vulnerable topic that I shared about that it's really, really hard, and I've been sitting on it for so long. So now you're giving me the motivation. I think I'm gonna publish it.
Yeah. Because that's the thing too. Yeah, those things that are super scary. I mean, for me, a real scary moment, a part of also what was very much wrapped up in my leaving the job and pursuing food full time and food blogging full time was that I accepted the fact that I'm an alcoholic and I worked through a recovery process and stepped into now 3 years sober. And that was a very challenging experience and something though that has been immensely valuable. And I would not be here talking to you on this call, doing what I'm doing, living what is a crazy and sometimes scary and terrifying, but absolutely fun and enjoyable, fulfilling life had I not followed through with that. And then, at a certain point, I just absolutely felt compelled to share that story on my blog. And so to, be this person who everybody sees on Facebook is like, she's got it all together and her life's so perfect and her kids are so cute and all we're seeing the highlight reel, right? And then for me to come out and say, guess what? I'm an alcoholic and this is something I struggle with. And this is something I've kept from everybody and I've kept people at arm's distance and I'm not doing that anymore. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying, right? To tell everybody, but at the same time, like the amount of reward that brought back just in terms of me not having to hide anymore from people and to be able to be authentically myself and be honest about just, hey, this is me, take it or leave it. I'm not perfect. If you're perfect, good on you, but I'm pretty sure you're not. So, for me, that was just so freeing, but then also how many people that I connected with after that privately behind who came to me and said, I struggle with this or so-and-so or my family. I mean, because everybody in some way, shape or form is affected by addiction in some capacity. And so just to give permission for other people to be imperfect and to share those challenging things and those real things was scary for me, but I was so glad I did it because of how it just connected stories with other people and really empowered them, certain people to, embark on their own recovery journey or be a little more understanding of other people who are going through, recovery issues and things like that. So I always say what's the worst that's going to happen? Somebody will judge you. Okay, guess what?
We can move on from that.
It's not too bad. It's not too bad.
That's a very good point. I love that. And I do think I feel this pressure. So I know it's out there to, especially if you're on Instagram everything has to be perfect or a certain, certain way. And, even your life, like I don't want to photograph my kitchen sometimes just because it's not all white and all perfect. And, but I love my kitchen. Right. So it's not like it's a bad kitchen, but it's like a life. We're living our own lives in the best way that we can. It doesn't have to always be about, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, except that I love your pitch towards, more authentic, more, if it feels vulnerable and it feels important to share it. I think obviously there's some resonates with people and it makes them connect with you more. That's nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And because we're all in this together, right? Like life is
Yeah,
hard.
it is.
But life is beautiful and life is amazing. But you gotta sometimes tear down the walls and make yourself be vulnerable because that's where the good stuff's at.
Oh, it is. Oh, I think that's such a great place to end it. And I have these fun questions I love to ask at the end of the interview if you're open
Yes,
to them. Okay, good.
please, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so what's one food item you can't live without?
Potatoes of
Mm.
any. So I mean potatoes all day, every day.
So you're definitely into the low carb thing then, right?
No, I've tried that too. That was the worst
Me
idea
too. I can't do low
ever.
carb.
I
Yeah.
was like, this sounds all great and wonderful, but no, I
No,
like
I
potato
need the
happens
potato.
and I'm not gonna stop.
So what's your favorite way to fix the potato? Do you just do baked or you fry
Yeah.
them or how do you do your
I
potatoes?
mean, there's no shame in the French fry game, but I
Mm.
absolutely like death row meal. I need a baked potato with the crispy skin, with the salt on the
Mm.
outside. It's perfectly soft in the middle. It gets you a little sour cream and chives and bacon, and there's nothing better.
It's a meal in itself, if you ask
Oh,
me.
it is very regularly around my house.
Really? And do you bake them or you don't do the whole microwave thing? They have to be baked because that's how you get the crispy
Oh,
on the outside.
yeah, but I mean, in a pinch, I'll definitely, wrap it in the towel, spear it, 5 minutes in the microwave. Like you got to do what you got to do sometimes to
That's
eat. But
I think the potato's gotten quite a bad rap. I've read
oh,
recently that they actually have a lot of health benefits.
yeah, I love potatoes. So if that's my that's my one downfall, it's
I
potatoes.
love it. It's not a downfall, it's a good thing.
A good thing. It's
Yes.
buds.
What's the favorite app on your phone?
Oh, let's see. App on my phone. Let's pull it up here. Not Instagram. No. Let's see. I do love Instagram. I love Planoly for Instagram so that it's something that has really helped me in my workflow just in terms of de-stressing because I do just from the standpoint of my own social media that Instagram is very much a platform where I focus, YouTube and Instagram. That's like my main focus in terms of social. And so knowing that I can shoot a bunch of things, have everything stored there, have the captions and have it all kind of ready to go so that I don't have to think about it when it's time to publish my Instagram post every morning. It's just a really it de-stresses me to know that I've got a full setup in my Planoly so that we are ready to rock the next
Does
morning.
does it allow you to respond to comments too, or is it just for posting and publishing?
It might. I
Okay.
just use I have not gotten too deep into it. Mostly
Yeah.
all I do is I upload the images on the web so I don't have to send them to my phone or anything. I just upload them from the web. And then
Yes.
for all of my images on Instagram, I also include like the settings and the setup information. And so
Okay.
it's very easy at that point then for me to, this was shot on with a 50 millimeter lens at f2.8 with, all that sort of
Yeah.
information is there because I'm definitely not going to remember that information 5 days later. So it's a really great way just to keep that information with the photo so that then when it's ready to upload, it's all there.
Very cool. Okay, so I'm just curious, you may not have time, but if you do you have time for either TV or books? And if so, what's your favorite? Or what are you binging on these days?
Well, as far as books, I am a nerd, a photography nerd. So I've been reading textbooks recently, Ryan. Like we were
Oh,
on vacation in Hawaii, and I'm sitting there reading a textbook on light, and Ryan's like, "Really, really, you're doing this?" I'm like, I want to expand my education." So reading some really great information too right now on color theory, because
mm,
delving into just how colors work, the psychology of colors. I feel like that's an area that I'll never stop pursuing information in. As
yeah.
far as TV, though, I'm a big Shark Tank fan, and comes on, and I'll sing a little dun 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 dun. Like I get super excited for that. And I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't watch as much Food Network as I used to. Growing up, I was a
Really?
Food Network junkie, but I don't watch of it much anymore.
There's so many food shows these days, it's hard to keep up with them all.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Like I think the Great British Bake Off or that
Oh,
show is
that
so
one's
good.
fun. That is so,
Yes.
because that's not my style of cooking. I just
Me
go,
neither.
these people are geniuses. Oh my
Yes.
gosh, how do they keep all that information in their heads?
And how do they do it?
I don't know.
And how do they
I
get kicked
have
off the show for look at that
uh,
3-tower cake they just made? Yeah.
stunning. It's
Yes.
stunning.
Yeah. Pretty amazing. So Tony, how can people find you online?
Sure. So the kind of the road that leads to all the other roads is joaniesimon.com. But probably what would be most beneficial for most food bloggers is to check me out on YouTube. It's just youtube.com/The Bite Shot.
And that's BITESHOT.
Yep. Yep. As
Yes.
in reference to the final shot. Like you've got your shoot all set up and the food is done. You've photographed everything and then you get to take a bite of it. That's the bite shot.
That's the bite shot. I love it. Joni, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I had a wonderful time.
Thank you, Marley. It was my pleasure.
Thanks to Joanie Simon for being my guest on today's episode of the Chopped Podcast. She's been such an inspiring guest. I think it's just so easy to feel overwhelmed with something like food photography. There's so much to know about it, and Joanie shares her knowledge in such a friendly and visual way. I don't know. I found it to be so helpful, and I hope you will too. I love how funny Joanie is. We just really had a great conversation, and I find myself laughing out loud when I watch her show. I think it's a perfect example of how we all should be in operating our own business. Like she said, not letting fear be in the driver's seat, knowing when and how to take risks and not letting that, be the thing that decides, what you're doing next, but showing up as the boss and taking it all with a dose of laughter too. I just love it. If you love today's show, be sure to head to iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review of this podcast. It takes only a couple minutes of your time and it really helps us so much. Finally, be sure to sign up today for the Chopped newsletter by going to chopped.academy and scrolling to the bottom of the page and clicking on subscribe. You inspire me, and I hope today's show was helpful and inspirational to you as well. Thanks for listening and have a great week.